Malaysia has released its budget for next year with a focus on reducing spending on subsidies and increasing the sources for new taxes. Now, the financial blueprint also aims to control a ballooning deficit.
The government is planning to spend $83.5 billion next year. CNA's Melissa Go joins us live from the desk. Melissa, now we watched this budget live. For anyone who was looking for bold moves on either increasing revenue or cutting subsidies, did they find it?
Well, for starters, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, in his 3-hour-long budget speech, did say that this is the biggest. He said 393 billion. That's over about 83 billion US dollars. And that, he said, is the biggest, focusing on growing the economy. He said it's expansionary, and he said attracting the right investment, creating the high-paying jobs, and also helping the poor, the marginalized, the lower income group. But analysts say, nevertheless, it is a prudent one. One that is aiming at reducing the country's fiscal deficit to 4.3% next year in 2024 and 3% in the medium term. By 2025, there's a 3.5% fiscal deficit target. How to do it? Well, by cutting subsidies. For example, no more blanket subsidies. Prime Minister Anwar, in a budget speech, he didn't exactly explain how he's going to do it or the mechanism, but he said that no more, subsidies for the rich, for the top tier, the top 10% income earner, and also the 3.5 million foreign earners. They no longer can enjoy that, he said. Now, last year, Malaysia spent over 17 billion US dollars just on subsidies alone, on oil, on fuel, on cooking oil, petrol, and so on. And this year, and also the next year, they're looking at lower spending for subsidies, but he did say that 90% of Malaysians will still be able to enjoy. They are not going to be affected. It's only the top tier. But what the government's doing right now in blanket subsidies, it's simply not sustainable, not to mention the wastage, the leakage. Now, all the savings, he said, will go to helping the poor, the lower income group, and that is the plan, but implementation is a key.
Yeah, so still some belt tightening and lots of details to iron out for this budget and how and who it will impact. But Mel, how is opposition likely to react to the scope of the budget and specifically whether it's really going to reignite the reforms that Anwar says are necessary? I mean, what's the reaction been like on the ground?
Well, Prime Minister Anwar, in summing up his budget speech, did say that he has to take it slow. Drastic actions will only do more harm. He said that, he will have to roll out reforms, changes in phases, in a measured manner, given that his unity government with sprawling interests and the opposition keep harping on issues, politicizing every single issues on the subsidy, the consolidation and so on, and the rising costs, as well as the slowing economy. Prime Minister Anwar has got a lot on his plate. But from business's point of view, as well as SMEs Association I spoke with, not all they are happy because some are quite upset with this 10% capital gains tax. They said, yeah, no doubt they saw it coming, but still they are not happy with the capital gains tax. On top of that, there's also a luxury goods tax of between 5 and 10%, and a 2% increase in services tax and so on. Now, he has to find money. He has to raise the revenue, without having to do the hugely unpopular goods and services tax. He's not going to do that because that is going to have political risks given his unity government that he has to stay intact. Although the election is not due till year 2027, he's got 4 years to fix the economy, he said.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing that with us. Melissa Go there, our Malaysia correspondent, joining us here live in studio.
And for more analysis, Dr. Tricia Yeo is the CEO at the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, joining us live from Kuala Lumpur. Tricia, we just heard from Melissa there. Prime Minister Anwar saying he needs to take it slow, drastic action not possible in terms of either cutting subsidies or increasing revenue. But even so, given that baby steps at some point have to evolve into more mature, substantial steps, the little steps we saw today in this budget speech? Are they on the right track?
Hi, thanks for having me. I think it's accurate to say that these are baby steps. There was nothing too exciting or perhaps even too alarming from the budget as far as the subsidy rationalization is concerned. I think this is the step in the right direction. Everyone in the Ministry of Finance and the government knows that it is not sustainable to keep our subsidy the way it is. It increased 322% from 2021 to 2022, and from 10% from 2022 to the current year. So as far as subsidy rationalization is concerned, what we are looking at is electricity, which has been happening already. Diesel has also been announced. Nothing on petrol rationalization of subsidies that was announced in the Prime Minister's budget speech. But I think just something to point out is that the 2 billion subsidy rationalization to be allocated to cash transfers, increasing cash transfers from 8 to 10 billion, that seems to be still rather minimal. And also something to point out is that if the major contributor to subsidy increases are from petrol prices, and if the government's projections on subsidy savings are based on $80 per barrel of oil, we are looking at perhaps an increase in oil prices next year, whether or not the projections will be accurate. So that's something to look out for.
So ultimately, Dr. Yeo, petrol subsidies are going to have to be addressed because, and this is quoting one analyst, when crude spikes, you're looking at 3% of GDP just going on subsidies in petrol alone. So what we see today, what we could see is more items. So, for example, Malaysia subsidizes diesel, petrol, liquefied petroleum gas, cooking oil, rice. These things you could see the scope reducing, or the amount of subsidies for each, or more targeted depending on, for example, income groups or the cars they drive. What kind of direction do you see the Malaysian government taking on this?
Yeah, so the problem is that there are no specific financial amounts that are stated in either the budget speech or the various budget documents that have been tabled in Parliament today. They have talked about some figures as to what the government has spent on subsidies in these various areas, but how much savings are projected, we have not yet seen this. So hopefully the government can be transparent as well in what it foresees and predicts to be actual savings when it comes to eventually removing these subsidies. So I think the approach the government is taking is obviously very gradual. It's very phased. The next thing that we're looking at, of course, is the targeted subsidy rollout that was already announced earlier by the Minister of Economy. And the other thing to, I suppose, welcome as part of the budget speech is that there's been a complete removal of the price ceiling on chickens and eggs. So that's something we welcome. Eventually, it's good for the market to be able to stabilize in terms of prices.
Dr. The other side of the coin, so you cut how much you spend. Also, you have to increase the sources of your revenue. Because Melissa was telling us just now, some SMEs not happy with the rise in service tax from 6 to 8%, the capital gains tax kicking at 10% from March next year, high value goods tax as well, up to 10% next year. This in place, again, Melissa mentioned, rather than launching the hugely politically unpopular GST, you have these other types of tax instead. With the GST, unpopular as it might be, a better consumption tax to be launching in terms of bringing in more revenue for the Malaysian government?
So again, this is something the market was already expecting as far as the increase of various tax groups were concerned. It was just a matter of timing, when is it going to come in, what the rates would be. So there are 2 points of view with regards to GST. One is that we continue increasing the percentage of the SST, the sales and service tax. And the other, of course, is to restore the GST, which was unfortunately rolled back. Our position is that ultimately the government will have no choice but to reintroduce the GST eventually. It is a more holistic taxation system that will capture a larger part and percentage of the economy. Unfortunately, as you say, it is politically unsuccessful to do so. It would not be feasible at this point in time. However, this is the best time to do it because there is some political stability relative to the last 3 years, and we do have some time. So the Minister of Economy has already said several weeks ago that the GST might have to be considered, and perhaps in the next year, this will be something that will be discussed. But the other taxes, capital gains tax and the luxury goods taxes, I think this, would have been seen coming. So the market should not be too surprised, I suppose, that the fact is that it's going to come in next year.
And thanks for that, Dr. Tricia Yeo. As Melissa mentioned, we do have time. G16 doesn't happen until 2027. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Tricia Yeo, CEO at Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs.